Over the years, I've done a lot of Thanksgiving messages here, I think. I keep thinking to my mom, it's like, I do with the holidays. I come around for New Year's, usually, or Thanksgiving and Easter, and always get to enjoy a good family dinner when I come, and a chance to enjoy with you. But as I was thinking about this Thanksgiving, I was kind of speaking on something that is a psalm that I've never really used for Thanksgiving before, but it's one that really spoke to me as I was thinking about where does Thanksgiving come from? Where do we find it in ourselves to have gratitude, to be thankful, to have hope? As we go through this world, there's a lot of opportunities for us to have that gratitude dissipate. We don't always appreciate what we have. It's more what we don't have that seems to always be the more important thing at the moment. Whether it's health or friendship or a job or whatever it is that we're looking for, it's not what we have that seems to get in the way of our Thanksgiving, it's what we don't have. And so I wanted to give us an opportunity to kind of spend some time in this in-between space. That maybe today you are like top of the mountain and everything is easy to be thankful for and you're feeling fantastic. I'm so glad you're in that spot today. And if you are, that's fantastic. And if this sermon goes over and misses you today, that's okay. But I think there's a lot of us who are in that in-between space. We've had to say goodbye to people we love. We've had heartache in our relationships. We've had challenges that we faced in our workplaces and in our homes. And in the midst of all of this, it's sometimes hard to find that Thanksgiving. And so I want to bring you to this Psalm of David, and Lowell read it well for us. I'm going to read it again just to keep it fresh in your mind. This comes from David. In these times, we think of David as, the guy who killed Goliath, the man after God's own heart, the great psalm writer with all these songs of joy. And yet David also was one who was not afraid to get into the mud a bit when it came to his conversations with God. One of the gifts of the Psalms is that it helps us understand this concept of lament. I don't know if you've ever thought about lament. It's not a word we talk about a lot. But it's really this place where in the midst of distress, there is still hope. And a lament is kind of this place where we sit in the unknown in between, where God has not yet answered everything that we have questions about. And it's okay to ask him about those things. But at the same time, it's not a place where we need to lose hope and despair. So here's David. "O Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day?" Sounds like him and God are having a good moment, right? He's in that space of angst, anxiety, distress, feeling as if God is not paying attention to his situation. How long will my enemy have the upper hand? Turn and answer me, O Lord my God. Restore the sparkle to my eyes, or I will die. Don't let my enemies gloat by saying, "We have defeated him." And don't let them rejoice at my downfall. But I trust in your unfailing love. I will rejoice because you have rescued me. I will sing to the Lord because he is good to me. What an interesting journey David takes in this song. It's why this song, Highlands, kind of spoke to me as I was thinking about this and thinking about that song and realizing that God is no less God even in our darkest moments. God is no less God even when we don't see him. He is no less good. He is no less loving. He is no less faithful, even when our questions go unanswered. That's a hard thing to grasp. But I think that's one of the reasons why David gets the kind of recognition he gets in the Bible. Because there was a part of him that even in the midst of struggle, when his life was being threatened, when he was, on the run from Saul and his men, wondering what God was up to, when he was trying to be faithful and his family tried to usurp him as king, throughout his whole life, it was never easy. There was never this time where he was at peace. I mean, his life was filled with so much turmoil that when he wanted to build a temple for God, the prophet said, "No, sorry, David, you got way too much blood on your hands for this. We can't let you build the temple. Your life is too tumultuous." And it ended up being his son Solomon who was able to build the temple that David always wanted to build. His life was not always easy. And in the heartache and in the loneliness and in those times of being just afraid and away from God, David wrote these psalms. He wrote these laments. He wrote these words to remind him of what was important. So I'm going to give you a word this morning. It's going to spell the word "word" as a word for Thanksgiving. It helps me remember what I'm going to say to you, and hopefully it'll help you remember what I said. But the W in the word stands for that first part of David wrestling with God. I want you to wrestle with God. It is okay to wrestle with God. Do you know that? I think sometimes we just kind of avoid him when we don't agree with him. Right? If you're not happy with what God's doing in your life, it's easy just to kind of go the other way and do your own thing. Whether you know it's right or wrong or you're not sure, it's still easier to kind of avoid God, right? And just go away, do your own thing, and then come back when either it works out and you say, "Ha, God, I told you so," or rather, what often happens is we go out on our own and we get worse situation, and then we're like, "Okay, God, I really need your help now, please." But it's okay to wrestle with God. What's fascinating in the story of the Bible is that there's Jacob, who was this rat of a fellow, second twin, the youngest one, steals his brother's birthright, negotiates all of these things, puts himself into these kind of rascally positions. And he encounters this angel at night, and he wrestles with the angel who was representing God. And Jacob wrestled all night and did not give up. And finally, the angel touched his hip and it left him with a permanent limp and blessed him because he did not give up in that wrestling. I want you to think about that, because that's a big part of our journey, is that what Satan would have us do is that when troubled times come, or when sin gets a hold of our lives, or when there's a conflict at work, or when there's something that's worrying you, his goal is to make you look at anywhere else but God. God's desire is that we would come to him with our problems, that we wouldn't be afraid to just throw them out there and wrestle with God about it, saying, "God, I don't understand this, I don't get this, make sense to me." It's okay to wrestle with God. It's in that wrestling, in that engagement, that we give God the opportunity to actually speak into our lives. Maybe something we don't want to hear. Maybe something we need to hear that we haven't seen yet. But if we feel frustrated with God and we go somewhere else and we do our own thing and we don't wrestle with him, we will never be able to hear what he has for us because we're looking in the wrong place. Wrestle with God. David wasn't afraid to wrestle with God. God, you're forgetting all about me. What about my problems? What about my situation? Do you want people to say that you're not a good God because they're beating me in battle? And he knew that he couldn't do it on his own. The O is to openly ask for God's help. David was the leader of men, right? They said Saul had his thousands, had slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s. He had men rising up as armies to follow him, to do whatever he asked them to do. He had the opportunity to take power and authority and use it however he wanted. And yet, he recognized his need for God. That he openly called out to God for help and said, I can't do this without you. It's okay to wrestle with God. But it's important that we also recognize and ask for his help. Because he's not going to impose himself on us. He wants to partner with us. And in order to do that, we have to be open to it. We have to say, God, I need you. I need your presence in this moment. I need your strength in this day. When Jesus says, give us this day our daily bread, is teaching his disciples how to pray, it's really coming back to that moment of recognizing that God is the source of help, of strength, of nourishment. And that if we want to experience his presence, we need to invite him in and ask him for his help. The R in our word for today, that's kind of two parts. First is resist despair by remembering his faithfulness. How do you avoid becoming discouraged when God is not answering your questions? When you're stuck in the wrestling and it goes on and you still don't have the answer? It comes down to remembering his faithfulness. God has given us his word to remind us of his faithfulness. The story for Israel is one that goes from the very beginning of calling Abraham out of Ur. And what does it have? It has this journey, right? Israel goes on their way. They disobey God. They get into trouble. God rescues them when they turn to him. And they get restored. And then they get into trouble again. And God rescues them. And they get taken into Egypt for slavery. And God rescues them and takes them out into the desert, and then they get mad in the desert and start worshiping idols, and God restores them again and leads them to the promised land. And over and over and over throughout history, we see this story of God redeeming, God healing, God restoring those who would trust in him. When we're feeling stuck in that wrestling place, when we've asked God for help and we still don't have the answers, we need to remind ourselves who God is and what he's really about. We need to remember what he's done for us in our lives. We sing that old hymn, count your blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. The key to not giving in to despair is to remember God's faithfulness. When you feel discouraged and without hope, count your blessings. Start to think about all the things that God has done, all the things that he's doing around you. One of the great reasons we want to get together as people of God and share our stories is so that your testimony can inspire and encourage someone else, that the way God is working in your life, the way you can recount your blessings can be that thing that helps somebody else see that God is faithful still in the midst of our own struggles. We need each other in this. Because sometimes our world gets really small, right? The bigger our problems feel, the smaller our world becomes, where we start focusing more and more on just us and surviving and getting through the next day. And we lose sight of all the community of people around us, all the possibilities of what God is doing around us. And it's in those moments when we feel most alone that we need to kind of reach out. We need to connect with other people and invite them in and say, hey, what has God been doing in your life lately? I don't know if you've ever had that conversation recently, but I encourage you to do it. When you get together as believers, that's what we should do, is we should say, hey, what's God been doing in your life? What's he saying to you? What has he blessed you with? How has he guided you in those wrestling times? Because the more we talk about that, the more we experience God together, the more we have a bag full of blessings to remember, right? The more we retell the stories of the healings and the miracles and the way in which God has brought people back from the edge, that we have this ammunition that we can carry with us so that we can fight off despair with praise and thanksgiving for what God has done. And that allows us to do the D in our word, which is to declare his praise even in the midst of the tension. In Hebrews 11, it says, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not yet seen. I remember as a kid in this church, that was the very first sermon message I ever got to share when Pastor Don Snell let me, as a 14-year-old kid, share a message in church on Sunday. Who does that? What a blessed man. I'm so thankful for his impact on my life. But he let me tell my story, and the first story I wanted to tell was this story of faith. Because somehow for me and my whole journey, this is how it measures up. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not yet seen. Faith is not based on what has happened. It's based on the confidence you have in what hasn't yet happened because of who you have faith in. That my faith in the character of God allows me to trust him in the uncertain times. That I can look back over what he's done and have certainty that he will be faithful in the future. That I can declare his praise in the midst of tension. That it is not fake happiness or naive optimism that allows us to praise in the midst of suffering or in the midst of darkness. Some people look at that and go, you're just how can you be always hopeful? How can you always be positive? It's not about being positive, except that I'm positive that I know who holds the future in his hands. And I'm positive that he loves me. And so I'll trust him for the rest of the details. Because I believe that there is a God who is not flapped by the things that flap me. He is not shaken by the things that shake me. He is not discouraged by the things that bring me down. For he knows me. He loves me, and he loves you, and he knows you. And it's in him that we have faith to trust for all uncertainties. It doesn't matter whether it's going well or going poorly. My joy and my gratitude is not based on how well it goes for me. It's based on how I walk each day with Jesus. In those hard times, in the difficult, frustrating, angst-giving times. I was going to say Happy Angst-giving as a sermon title. I turned on that one. But in the midst of that pain, right, where we feel the loss and the hurt and the fear and all of those other things, there is a source of peace that is beyond our comprehension. And it comes in the presence of Jesus. That it's in him. That it's with him. When I trust him, when I'm okay wrestling with him, not hiding from him, that I can find peace in the midst of all uncertainty. And friends, we live in uncertain times. You know, you don't know what tomorrow will bring from a health perspective, from a weather perspective, from a global war perspective, from a what is going to happen with your job or your kids or anything. We can't make tomorrow the way we want it to be. And if we did, we'd probably mess it up in a big way. But we can have confidence in the one who is able to faithfully walk with us through tomorrow. Right? The strength for today, the hope for tomorrow, and for eternity comes as we walk step by step with Jesus. I love to say it's more complicated than that, and it really isn't. It's just that there's so many things that want to make us walk away from Jesus. There's so many things that we let get in our lives that take our focus off of wrestling with God, and we'd rather wrestle with the problem, or we'd rather wrestle with the person who's getting in our way of our happiness than wrestle with God over how can I be who you want me to be in the midst of this. So wrestle with God. Openly ask him for help. Resist despair and remember his faithfulness. And declare his praise even in the midst of tension and uncertainty. That's my word for you for this Thanksgiving. May God bless you. May he be near to you, and may you embrace the struggle. Just know that you don't have to do it alone. God wants you to embrace it with him. May he bless you and guide you and give you a joyful Thanksgiving, for he is good, and his love endures forever. Amen.